Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. Another reaction video for you guys here today. And today I'm going to be reacting to a Israel-Palestine debate. For the most part, I've been not up and down. For the most part, I'll say it like this. I've had my values. I've heard a lot of information. And as of right now, I think Israel has been doing a lot of bad things. Put it very simple for people to understand. A lot of the stuff they've done recently in Rafah, the way they've been acting in terms of negotiations and peace negotiations, a lot of that has been questionable. So, at the very least, there is valid arguments in terms of the bad things that's been going on from Palestine and Israel. The question is, will either side be able to acknowledge the bad things from both sides? We shall see. Let's dive right into it. Will I watch the full thing? I don't know, but I'm going to watch a good chunk of it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. I said I'd give everybody 5 minutes to start. Brianna, why don't we start with you?
Oh.
Opening statement.
I think we talked about this. I said, well, I don't really feel like I have an opening statement. And in some ways, I feel as though the reality of what's been happening on the ground for the last 7 months speaks for itself. People who started out at the beginning of this conflict feeling very strongly that Israel merited a response to an attack, which, as we all know, was the deadliest since the Holocaust, have now, after seeing 7 months in which 34,000 conservatively people have been killed, 3/4 of whom are women and children, feel like enough is enough. And so what this framing of this conversation is, has Israel gone too far? I think that's almost a different question from whether or not, or what the future of Palestinians, or the future of Gazans in particular, should be. So I think I started there, and I'm interested to respond.
Fine. Let me just jump in, though, because the motion is it a just war rather than has Israel gone too far? Do you feel it's a just war?
No, I'm struggling because I don't think I would characterize it as a war at all, given how one-sided it is, and given that one side is being denied the right to have a state in the first place. As recently as yesterday, the United States vetoed a UN resolution to recognize Palestine as a state. And so the term war is more typically just applied to more equal parties, and I think the asymmetry here is what I think a lot of people balk at, even as they are rightly horrified by the loss of innocent life on it.
Does war matter if they're equal sides? I mean, I don't think so. I probably could look up the legal. I mean, it doesn't matter. Let's move on.
For a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a just war. I don't think it's a just war for two reasons. I agree with what Brianna said very much about the specific conditions under which this war has been fought. The massive amount of civilians' lives lost. 70% of the casualties have been women and children. That means a minimum of about 25,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza. No government in any war since the 1980s has killed civilians at as fast a rate, with the exception of full-blown genocides like Rwanda or the Second Congo War, which is the bloodiest war since World War II. And this isn't some accident. This isn't because Hamas is just hiding and using these people as human shields. It's because Israel has policies that allows them to kill up to 20 civilians if it leads to the death of a single suspected junior militant, and hundreds of civilians to kill a single senior Hamas commander. So I don't think that's just. There's also starvation. I mean, in the debate, we'll go through a bunch of things. But the other part of it we have to think about is what is Israel fighting for? October 7th was a tragedy. It was a massacre. It should have never happened. It should never happen again. But this conflict didn't start on October 7th. And what Israel is fighting for is to have a Jewish state in Palestine, an ethnically Jewish state. That is identity politics. I think anybody here that had a problem with identity politics on any topic over the woke wars over the last couple of years, you shouldn't be supporting the United States sending $300 billion to one of the most clear-cut examples of identity politics in the Middle East. This is not good for U.S. security. This harms us, and that money makes it easier for Israel to avoid making peace with its neighbors. So I don't think the ultimate cause of the Zionist project is just. For the exact same reason, I opposed all the wokeness of the last couple of years. I opposed the goal of having a Jewish ethno-state, but then also the conduct in the war has not been just. Although October 7th was a tragedy, Hamas should not be in power, and I have no problem with terrorists and murderers being taken out, but there are also terrorists and murderers amongst the Israeli government.
Okay. Two opening statements. I don't remember their names. Okay, not bad. Don't really have a lot to say. We'll see how everything kind of turns out.
A quick zoom in. One thing I found very interesting, you talked about the Israeli army ratios for who they're allowed to kill on what basis. What ratio would you be comfortable with?
It's not that I have a particular ratio in mind.
If it was 1 to 5, would that be okay?
Well, to be clear, you should talk about where those numbers are coming from. There was a really explosive report that came out maybe 3 weeks, a month ago from Plus 976 magazine.
Yeah.
970, I might be getting the number wrong.
972.
972 is the area code, is the country code. The discovery was that some intelligence sources from the IDF were talking about AI technology that was being deployed in lieu of human judgment and the risk tolerances of the AI that was being used to assess whether or not a given target should be targeted and killed. And when human judgment was a bigger part of the equation, one, there was an oversight that didn't exist when you're just letting the computer run it. But one of the more pernicious aspects of the AI is that they had, whereas human judgment would say, look, it's a very, very high ranking person, there's a lower risk tolerance, it's a low ranking person, there's less risk tolerance. There was a conflation of who was actually targeted in the first place, and the evidence that was being used to target someone in the first instance was very flimsy. So if you lived in the same household with someone who might be a member of Hamas and were once on the same cell phone plan, you are a target. Very flimsy things like that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to get to the bottom of this issue before I give them a chance to.
The point is, my question is different. The point is that once someone is identified, right, target.
Let's get into that in a second. I just want to finish this one point.
I don't have an answer for you, but what I know is you should not be the worst since the 1980s.
Yeah, she just wanted a debate. That a minus 1 point. I'm adding points. That's a minus point. Everybody's getting a chance to. You just want to kind of prove your case and be right and all that stuff. We're trying to have a conversation and get to the point. So she is a minus 1 point, so now she has 0. I think her opening gave her a +1. I think his opening is a +1 too. So +1, 0. Let's go.
It's like if you are, you're probably not a just war. So
I guess what I'm asking is, at what point would it be? What ratio is the acceptable one? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I don't know, but if we could get closer to, the American assaults in Afghanistan and Iraq, those were terrible, but they were better than this.
Okay,
so
that is an interesting point. People keep on bringing up these ratios, but these ratios, how much value do these ratios have? Is it a circumstance where, and obviously these lives matter, but in terms of these ratios, we are talking about the value of human life, but also what is the point of bringing up the ratios in general if we know that if I were to bring up a 1-to-2 ratio, you'll still be upset, right? Like there's no okay ratio. The thing is, what's something a stronger argument that can be made is, does the ratio are they doing their best to make sure that the civilian numbers are as low as possible? And that is a better question. If this is the best they can do, then I mean the ratios is basically irrelevant. So I think that was a very interesting question. He doesn't have a really response because there's really no good response unless you know for a fact that they could do better and they're not doing it. Unless you know for that fact and you kind of explain it, then yeah, I would. His response was very weak. -1 point. Sorry. 0-0.
Just bring it down.
Okay, we'll come back to you guys, and Brianna, feel free to make the point about AI and everything else.
We're not going to respond to that yet. Right?
Don't, please. Can I just get a couple of quick opening statements from either of you?
Sure.
And then we can have the big fight, all right? So, because I want everybody to say something that they can be challenged on. Michael, just war?
Well, I was told there'd be no opening statement, so this is going to be a little off the cuff. And I want to first say thank you to all of my Jewish comrades who grabbed me by the shoulder before I came up here and said the weight of the Jewish world is on your shoulders. And I assure you that I will not solve this. Brianna will not solve it, Eli will not solve it. But I will say this, the motion is a moral question. Is this a just war? It's slightly different than the question, is it being waged in a just manner? I suppose we can have that debate too, but let's start with the just war. If this is not a just war in principle, then there are no just wars. If one can think that on the day of October 7th, and our opponents have both pointed this out, and they're right to do so, I'm glad they did, the worst single day since the Holocaust. Okay, remember, by the way, you have 1,200 people that were murdered in a matter of hours, in the most brutal way. Now, if anyone saw the videos that the Israeli embassy was putting out and not releasing to everybody for obvious reasons, I mean, you see a moment of a father being killed in front of his children, blown to bits, the child covered in blood, and says, "Why am I alive?" On the video taken by Hamas. What we don't often talk about when we talk about Hamas, we do get bogged down in a lot of details that are very difficult to adjudicate now because the numbers are questioned by everyone, but let's just stay in the moral argument for 1 second. And say that Hamas is very clear in its charter and in its revised charter, which is no better, that it is a 7th century cult that is bent on destroying the Jewish nation. Now, if we want to say up here that we're okay with that we're okay with Israel being destroyed, a member nation of the United Nations ratified in 1948, we can talk about how this happened, etc., but Hamas wants it gone. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a war against a group of people, let's be generous and call them a group of people, that have an eliminationist ideology, to borrow from Daniel Goldhagen. It is an eliminationist ideology. They do not lie about this. When they tell you what they believe them. It is clearly a just war, and I will, invite interesting conversation about whether it's being waged in a just manner. That's a different question.
Before I go to the point. To push back just for the sake of
okay, I'll give you +1. I give everybody a +1 for opening statement, unless it's like terrible. It's a just war because of the cause of why they're doing the war. Okay, I see what you're saying.
pushing back, I suppose. Before I go to Eli, I really like the distinction you made between it being a just war and being a prosecuted in a just way. Can we really make that distinction, though, based on, not least on what Jake was saying, in the sense that if you come into my home and kill my wife, and then I go into your home and kill you, your wife, your whole family, isn't there a point at which that ceases to be just?
Well,
no matter
it depends if your wife is killed by an organization that is supported by sovereign states like Qatar and have enormous amounts of funding and have essentially an army. That is what the Israelis are trying to destroy. They're not trying to destroy the two people that came in and killed this particular family.
But they are killing a lot of civilians.
Of course, it is a war. And I'm not saying that I like that. I absolutely do not. And you see, it sounds like you're just engaging in cliche when you say every death in a war is a tragedy. It is true, and you do have to say it. It's not a bit of throat clearing. But when you look at these numbers, which are very, very contested. I mean, Brianna's contesting some of the other numbers, but you can also contest the number of people who have died, the number of civilians who died.
What number do you think is the number of Gazans who died?
I promise you I'll get to that.
I would say it's not I'm not on the ground there. Even Hamas provides the numbers down. But yeah, no, obviously when you're waging a war, it's going to be brutal. And it's deeply unfortunate. There are, of course, rules of war, and I suppose we can discuss in bigger detail of how that's being engaged right now. And I think that's the question that is the hottest question that I see.
And we will get to the other question. Eli?
Well, I think we should start. I mean, a lot of the talking point you'll hear on the left usually is that war didn't start on October 7th, and that's true. So we should look at the 5-6 previous skirmishes or wars or rocket wars, whatever you want to call them, and ask the question, why didn't Israel finish off Hamas? They haven't changed. And the reason is because they understood that Hamas fights in such a despicable way as to maximize the civilian casualties on their own side. We all know, we've heard this before, that they will launch rockets from schools and mosques and so forth. But there was always, it was known to the Israelis, in fact, it was known to human rights organizations, it was known to news agencies for many years that the headquarters of Hamas's Qassam brigades, their military wing, was under the largest hospital in Gaza. Who does such a thing? Unless there's a deliberate strategy to both maximize civilian casualties on your adversary side as well as the people you purport to govern. Now, the atrocities committed on October 7th were just so inhumane and so barbaric and savage that it left Israel no choice but to confront this dilemma that it had been dealing with for the past 17 years. It has to destroy this organization, despite the fact that it has spent nearly 2 decades building up an infrastructure. I might add, with aid provided, that was supposed to go to the people of Gaza to build an entire underground city just for its fighters and commanders so that they can be safe as Israel retaliates for the atrocities committed by Hamas. So when you're dealing with such a stark choice, yes, there are going to be civilian casualties because the army, the military that is usually supposed to protect those civilian casualties, would rather sacrifice them for a PR victory. And that kind of simple thing. So back to your question, is it a just war? It absolutely is a just war, but it's more than just a just war. It's a necessary war. Because what Israel must do in eliminating Hamas is to show to every other dirtbag Islamist terrorist group and nation state like Iran that this tactic of fighting wars will not prevail. Because if Hamas survives, then you will better believe that the next wars that are fought by various kinds of fanatical terrorist groups will continue to learn from their tactics. So in my view, it's an easy question. Of course, it's a just war. It's a necessary war. And when Israel finishes, hopefully, Baruch Hashem, and Hamas is no more, they ought to win a Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay, +1. +1.
Yuck. Onions, says another customer.
LU2 Premium.
So, before we open it up, I think there's probably a lot of people here who would agree with you that if you could press a button and Hamas was no longer there, that would be desirable. The question is, can you eliminate Hamas by a war in which lots and lots of innocent people are being killed and maimed, or are you going to create more terrorists?
Well, listen, there will probably always be people who will be seduced by this lunatic death toll ideology. That's for sure. But there's a huge difference between having people believing all kinds of bad ideas and then having those ideas married up with a leadership, a military, a financial arm, governing a statelet, as it were. So there are still, sadly, Nazis and neo-Nazis today, but the Third Reich does not exist. So in answer to your question, you're never maybe going to eliminate these terrible, toxic ideas, sure. But if you can show that these ideas will not be able to govern a place like Gaza or anywhere in the world, and that their leaders, wherever they are not going to be safe, I think that's a very important deterrent, and it makes it a much less of a threat.
Okay. Brian, I want to come back to the numbers point, because I think it's really important. I'm going to do something which is blatantly going to fail, but I'm going to try anyway, which is ask every single one of you to answer that question very briefly, which is how many civilian casualties do you think there have been in Gaza, and how many Hamas fighters have been killed? And we'll just go around everybody and give me a figure.
I think it's really important to note that Israel has accepted and verified Hamas's number, the Hamas's numbers routinely over years and years and years. And at no point has the Hamas numbers that have come out in the immediate wake of an incident been revised. Has there been a determination that those numbers were an estimation that Israel would have to recalibrate its choice to rely on those numbers? When we're talking about Hamas numbers,
just give me the numbers. Just give me the numbers.
Hamas is the government. I did a really short opening, so I hope you don't mind if I. Hamas is the government of Gaza. So in Gaza, the person who picks up your trash from outside of your house is Hamas. The person who runs the hospital and gives you your childhood vaccines or whatever is Hamas. literally everybody is Hamas. And the Hamas Health Ministry, which has been keeping these numbers, has been relied upon by international organizations.
Is this true? They're counting people who just go to the store as Hamas? I don't know. I feel like that's a stretch. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it's a stretch.
And by Israel up until this point, at which it is, I think, inconvenient for Israel to accept these numbers that are very, very high. These numbers have been stuck at about 34,000 for over a month now, because everyone who used to do the counting in the Hamas Health Ministry is dead. The hospitals have all been destroyed. Every hospital in Gaza has been destroyed, partly because of mythology, like the idea that a Hamas headquarters was under Al-Shifa Hospital, which was disproven roundly. It absolutely was.
Brianna, you're entitled to your opinion, but not your
There was no Hamas headquarters under Al-Shifa Hospital. There hasn't been, and there continues not to be.
Let me just ask this again. So I asked about fighters. I asked you about Hamas fighters. So 34,000 total. How many fighters?
3/4 of those are women and children.
So how many of those are
So
fighters?
even if all of the men were Hamas, which we know there aren't, because, for example, just a month ago, we saw the drone footage of an IDF drone tracking and shooting 4 Palestinian children as they were going through the rubble of their own house. I mean, there's innumerable examples of seeing people who are not Hamas being killed.
Okay.
Israel obviously notoriously shot 3 of its own
fighters?
hostages that were stripped down new, trying to get free. So even if you count whatever the remaining 3/4 as being Hamas, it still remains the case that 3/4 of the 34,000 are women and children.
So how many would you say are fighters?
I rely on the same numbers that everybody else does. I'm saying even worst case scenario.
So what are those numbers?
You want to, after you do math, what's
No,
1/4 of 34?
Well, I don't think all the men have been killed.
8,000 or so.
Do you agree with that, Jake?
It's approximately right. I mean, the numbers that I have, these are the numbers believed by U.S. intelligence. Around 35,000 total killed, 70% women and children. That's 24,500, and then not all the men are going to be Hamas.
So somewhere 70,000.
That's the best number.
I'll go back to guys. Do you agree with those numbers first? I just want to establish this as a
No, I
base.
do not. Let me explain. I think a lot of people may have missed this story, but Hamas's own Gaza Ministry of Health revised downward their own casualty estimates about a month
That's not
ago.
true. That's not
Yes,
true.
it is.
No, that's false. What happened is that they said that about 11,000 people did not have all the identifying information. The United States continues to believe the total number. That's false.
I don't know that the U.S. government.
I'll put out sources online.
What's your number? What's your number?
First of all, I'm not trying to get out of it, and I'm not trying to. But I'm saying I think the most prudent thing to say is that, especially in the fog of war, we don't actually know who was a civilian and who was a fighter, and we usually find out that these things are wildly different. Just like we hear initial reports of massacres that turn out not to be massacres, or we hear initial reports of things that seem fine and turn out to be much worse. There's a lot of things that, in the heat of a battle, in the heat of a war, we can't possibly know. But I am comfortable saying that it is telling that some 10,000 or 11,000 people they can't identify doesn't mean, I think that would be reason for some sort of skepticism at that point, considering that is their job. More importantly, I would trust people like John Spencer, who is the expert on urban warfare from West Point, who went and embedded with the IDF and did his own survey, and he says that Israel's standard at this point, or the ratio for how many civilians to fighters are being killed, is far better than U.S. Performance in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Well, in order to say that, you have to know what the number is, right? To be able to make that claim, you have to know what the number is. So what approximate number is it?
I would say approximately,
you can't
the
say
IDF says around 13,000 fighters are gone. Hamas, I think, has a lower number. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. And then we have this number between 21,000 and 35,000 civilians, and it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I mean,
the number specifically.
Well, I don't have one.
You don't have
I have the same information as Brianna said that everybody here has. But I'll tell you one thing that is relevant. There was a attack on a hospital, very early days of October. Everybody remembers this. And we found out later through multiple investigations, multiple journalistic outfits, discovering that it was an errant Islamic Jihad rocket. The initial number that was given of civilian dead by the Gaza Ministry of Health was 500. Who died in a hospital? 500. Go look this up. And then it was revised down after it was revealed that it was their own.
Yes, it was revised down.
I'm talking, and you're not going to talk right now. So I'm not Robbie Slava. Sorry. So those numbers, like
kind of cringe, but
keep in mind that Dresden, for instance, where I keep seeing this coming up on Twitter, etc. The German government determined that the number in Dresden.
I'm not saying much because I'm just kind of hearing what they're saying. I mean, for the most part, a lot of them are not really giving a number. The value of how much are Hamas fighters is very interesting. Someone brought up an interesting point, right? The fact that we don't truly know which one's a civilian and which one is a fighter, right? At this point, I mean, how could you know at the end of the day, right? If someone were to die and they're dressed up as a civilian and they die and they have nothing to tie them back to Hamas on their deathbed, is that calculated a civilian or Hamas? I think that's an interesting point, but I also do think that this is where war gets muddy. You still have to take the necessary precautions to ensure that you're not involving innocent people, right? So it's tough. It's tough.
anywhere from 20 to 30,000 about 15 years ago. I mean, knowing this stuff in real time is very hard. It's really impossible to answer that question without having some kind of knowledge. What I can tell you is I don't trust anybody in this. When I was in Ukraine, right after the war started in Ukraine, I was in a bar and they had a thing up, the number of jets shot down, number of Russians killed, and it was wildly inflated.
Yeah.
And I was on the side of the Ukrainians. I didn't want to see them be invaded by these heathen Russians, but I was like, I think they're kind of inflating that. So everyone is doing that. So clinging to these numbers as if the Gaza Ministry of Health, of all people, don't have a vested interest in puffing them up as big as they can.
Okay, so one thing I observed is actually we're not that far off.
Yeah, that's what's incredible. Everyone basically agreed with the numbers.
Yes.
The numbers conversation it's not actually a good question.
Well, you started it by saying the ratio.
No, well, the ratio,
that was your
the ratio is important. The total numbers are not important because.
But that's why I'm trying to work out. What ratio? Fighters to civilians?
Okay,
You're
yes,
saying there's too many
okay, I understand. The ratio is important.
Yeah.
But at the end of this conflict,
he gets a minus one.
Going to come to approximately
that was
equal numbers. This has happened in all of the previous conflicts.
That was,
Israel's
what was he
estimates, Gaza's
doing?
estimates, the United States' estimates, they're all in about the same place. So, like, talking about, they're trying to exaggerate the numbers, so they said 500 or whatever. Yeah, they were wrong when they said that. They revised down, and I'm not even necessarily
wrong.
I'm not even necessarily. Or maybe it was
Within
manipulative.
24 hours, that was correct.
One at a time.
No, but my point is that
Big ratio. 500
no, it's fine. I agree that Hamas has an incentive to incentivize the number of civilians, and Israel has an incentive to incentivize to maximize the number of combatants. But I'm just saying, after the end of all of these conflicts, they get to the same numbers. They're all around the same place. So this isn't really going to be.
Okay,
Here's
we
the
agree,
important
right?
point. Here's the important point. Part of why the Hamas health ministry is very good at tracking the deaths is because, and by the way, Israel isn't contesting, apart from for political reasons, took a while for them to start contesting these numbers. So Israel knows where every single person in Gaza lives. Gaza is under the control of Israel. It is an occupied territory according to international law. And as a consequence, they know the names and ages and addresses of all the people that have been killed. That is why Palestinians have been able to put up slideshows where you can scroll through. It takes about, I think, 7 minutes to scroll through the names of just the 13,000 children that have been killed with their ages next to their names. These are real people. And so even if you think every adult, including all of the women, were Hamas and deserve to die, I think there's a really important question as to whether or not you think the 13,000 children who have been killed, some of whom we've watched been tracked down and killed by
do they deserve to be killed? No, but again, it's war, so it's like
consequences, collateral damage for this allegedly just war.
Okay.
So Brianna, if the reason that you trust those numbers is because they have the specific information, well, doesn't that also mean that you wouldn't trust numbers that were then they couldn't say anything information about this 10 or 11,000?
What are you talking about? I don't understand.
When they revised their numbers, they said these are people that are part of the totals, and we don't have names or anything else with that.
Corroborating evidence is what I'm describing. So for a lot of the deaths, they're able to.
You don't have any corroborating evidence.
Can you respond to the 13,000 children and whether or not you think that they're
I'm happy to
appropriate
respond to
to collateral
13,000.
damage?
Can you respond to whether or not
You
you still
haven't
think
done so yet.
What?
Can you respond? You said
Okay, but you haven't answered my
question.
question. You just told me
I have a
that
question
the
first,
reason that you
right?
trust the numbers is because they painstakingly
That's not what I
give
said.
the names of the agents.
No.
Yes, you did.
I said one of the
And then I asked you if that's the case.
all right, reel it in, people.
Everybody stop.
I said one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that you should come to trust the numbers is because there are these.
I feel like she would have a stronger case if if she's just a peace activist, then I mean, like, this would hit home more. But like, every single war, children die, so it's like, I hear you. We don't want innocent children dying. I 100% agree to this. But again, it's war. So I guess when she prefaced the fact that she doesn't think it's a war, but it is though. But it's a tough situation because you can't excuse children's deaths, but the child deaths are proxy of what war is, unfortunately.
These records that can corroborate many of the deaths. Moreover, I would point to other instances. For example, the fact that a CNN investigation showed that Israel has desecrated 16 cemeteries in Gaza since this conflict started.
Okay.
Is Hamas under the cemetery? At what point do we acknowledge that this is an effort to destroy a community so that no one ever wants to return and ethnically cleanse them out of Gaza permanently?
Okay, cool. So we'll leave that part there because one of the interesting things is actually everybody agrees on the numbers, broadly speaking, and yet we're having this debate about it from a perspective of everybody actually agreeing on the numbers. So you brought up the ratio, right, which is why I've been honing in on the numbers point. Yeah. So the ratio is about 1 to 5, broadly speaking. Right?
It depends. Which is what I was talking about earlier with the AI program. That I'll let him answer.
Yeah. So that's where we are now. On that basis, why? And I'm going to ask them an equally annoying question for their side. But what should Israel have done in response? At least we've had this discussion so many times on my show. When you ask somebody, "What should Israel have done?" and they say, "Not this," and they won't ever say what Israel should have done.
I'm happy to answer that.
What should Israel have done in response to October 7th?
So very, very targeted strikes against actual Hamas targets that do not let this much civilian casualties. Somebody in the audience is laughing. So
that's such a terrible answer. Strikes at actual what? That's the most idealistic answer I've ever heard. But that is a very idealistic answer.
Let me point out a little piece of detail about that. So Israeli intelligence sources have leaked that 2,000-pound bombs, these are dumb bombs that are not precision, they're cheaper munitions. They're not being used to uncover tunnels, as the PR agents have said, but to kill individual junior-level militants in their apartment buildings, okay? And thus, in line with the rule of engagement, where they can kill 20 civilians to kill a single suspected junior militant, to kill all the civilians who live there. Nearly half of Israeli munitions dropped on Gaza are imprecise dumb bombs. So this is terrible. Okay, so you can, I hate Hamas, I want to get rid of Hamas. The second thing you need to do is actually resurrect the peace process, because what we've seen at every point in history is that if when the Palestinians feel that there is a real path towards peace, they moderate, the hatred decreases, and the violence stops. This is how the second Intifada ended. So the second Intifada ended with the resurrection of the peace process, okay? And since the end of the second Intifada, Fatah has not engaged in, violent terrorism. Okay, so there's that. And then there was also the Oslo Accords in the 90s, which ended when the peace process didn't feel like it was working towards anything that was going to be successful, because Clinton required to Arafat that he waive the right of return, not limit the right of return. I'm talking about Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed from their home, expelled, okay? Benny Morris counts 24 massacres that happened in Palestine. And these include areas where, at least 150,000 were pure expulsion. In the Nakba, okay, of a total of 750,000, and then many others who fled in fear and all sorts of other things. But a large portion was actively expelled. And there are Palestinian refugees that are still actually alive from back then that can point to you exactly where their home was. They can point to you exactly where their home was, where their children are alive, where their grandchildren are alive, and they can point exactly to where their family's home was. Homes that often those families lived on for generations, okay? And that land was expropriated after the war and given to Jewish owners. Golden Meir lived in a house.
Let me rewind.
At least 150,000 were pure expulsion in the Nakba, okay, of a total of 750,000, and then many others who fled in fear and all sorts of other things. But a large portion was actively expelled. And there are Palestinian refugees that are still actually alive from back then that can point to you exactly where their home was. They can point to you exactly where their home was, where their children are alive, where their grandchildren are alive, and they can point exactly to where their family's home was. Homes that often those families lived on for generations, okay? And that land was expropriated after the war and given to Jewish owners. Golda Meir lived in a house that was stolen from a Palestinian Christian and given to her. Okay,
so just come back with me to what Israel should have done. Yep.
Targeted strikes that don't hit civilians and resurrecting the peace process.
Okay, Brianna, what should Israel have done?
I think you're right. I think Jake's right that it's really important to answer the question of what Palestinians want, to answer the question of what Israel should do in the wake of October 7. And I think pointing to the fact that there's like half the population of Gaza today are the actual people, or the descendants of the 700,000 who were purged, ethnically cleansed from the land that is now called Israel and the Nakba. So I'm sure many of you can imagine what you would do in that sort of a scenario. If when your grandparents were young and your parents were their children in their house, they had been chased out of wherever you live, 13 Pine Drive or whatever, and you were forced to move a state over in a refugee camp. That's constructively what Gaza is. It's a refugee population of 2.3 million people. And you can look over there. You are close enough, you can Google Maps if you have Google.
And I'm going to put this to them. I'm going to put this question to them. But what should Israel have done?
That there's a family that's literally living in a house that you might still have keys to, tending olive groves that were your family's line of business, if they haven't cut those all down. And so the people who have had that experience, as you can imagine if you were in their shoes, are never going to let up, wanting to have the right to return to their homes. This is not a kind of 2,000 years ago sort of a dream. This is a
-1, bro. Answer the goddamn question. She's trying to morally load everything to really resonate with people, and he just wanted answers. He wants to get down to the details, and she's not trying to do that. She wants to go on these long-winded narrations of "woe is me, Palestine."
In my lifetime,
you want to return to India?
In my lifetime, you purged me from my literal home where I have keys to, and now it's being occupied by someone who maybe immigrated from Europe, maybe immigrated from Brooklyn, and that injustice really hits home. On top of that, you've been denied the right to have any kind of state, a passport, an airport, a country, the kind of things that constitute a country, right? Joe Biden's now spending your tax dollars building a port in Israel, in Gaza rather, because Gaza isn't allowed to have those kinds of basic infrastructure projects on its own. So what absolutely needs to be done is for there to be a right of return for the people who were purged out of Israel.
So to be honest, just so I understand, you think that Israel's response to October 7th would have been to build Gaza an airport? Is that right?
Is that what you think I just said?
Yes, that's legit what you just said. You want a right of return to Palestine after October 7th. The question is, what should have Israel done after October 7th? You just went on a whole brigade on everything that Palestine doesn't have right now. Yes, that's what you just said. That is 100% what you just said. See, I don't know. What did she expect? She didn't answer the question.
comprehension issues, Eli? If you think that that's what I just said.
Well, no, I'm trying to get you just gave a long.
I can slow it down for you and say it again if you're struggling to understand, Eli. Would you like me to say it for you again?
I think, Brianna, I'm asking you. You were asked what Israel should have done, and you gave a long soliloquy about how God doesn't have infrastructure.
As the moderator, I do.
Is that what you think Israel should have done in response?
You haven't answered my question, which is fine.
The right of return. Do you not know what the right of return is?
I know all about the right of return.
Hold on, let me do my job. So, in response to October 7th, Israel should have instituted the right of return.
Long before October 7th.
No, but after October 7th.
There's going to be no peace until Palestinians.
Again, she's not answering the question. She's not answering the question.
Granted the right of return. Yes, that's right.
We're talking about this particular war, and we're asking if it's a just war.
I think there's a world in which people kind of entrench.
Answer the question. Oh my God. Yo, she is so annoying. Oh, she is unbearing. She is trying so hard not to answer this question. She is trying her absolute best not to answer this question. Oh my goodness.
Physically understand the kind of Old Testament eye for an eye sensibility.
I'm going to put this all to them. Sure. I'm asking you, after October 7th, what should Israel have done? It's a fair question.
I'm literally answering.
You have not answered my question.
Like I was saying, I think intrinsically there's an idea that there's an eye for an eye situation after October 7th immediately, where a certain number of people needed to be killed, Hamas needed to be targeted, there needed to be a reaction, right? I can understand that. But in the first week of the siege after October 7th, more bombs were dropped on Gaza. 25.
Yo, what the fuck? Answer the question. She is being difficult on purpose. Oh my goodness. She is doing her best not to answer this goddamn question. Why is she struggling so hard to answer this question? Oh my goodness.
5-mile strip by 5 miles wide, then were dropped on Afghanistan in 1 year of war.
Okay, let me try a different way. Do you agree with Jake?
And very quickly, the number of Palestinians that have been killed doubled, tripled, quadrupled the number that had been killed on October 7th. So the question is,
ignore you
much less than what's been done. Almost immediately, there was a retribution in a kind of Old Testament way. And everything beyond that, I see very little moral justification for.
Okay. Now, you guys, I hope you answer my question.
Wow.
We got there, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate that. We did get there. I'm not being a dick about it. One of the biggest arguments about October 7th is that what do you expect oppressed people to do? If you're living in the situation that Brianna and Jake are describing, if your family's been moved from their homes, if they see daily violence, if all of this stuff is going on, what do you expect those people to do? Now, this isn't in any way to obviously justify October 7th, but isn't the behavior of Israel going to continue leading to these sorts of atrocities and this endless war that never ends?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, if you go back to 1936, the first time that the Yishuv, before there was a Jewish state, responded to the Peel Commission was to accept partition of the land. The response from the Arabs was known as the Arab riots, which were quite destructive. Moving forward a little bit more, 1947, there's a UN partition plan. Guess what? David Ben-Gurion and the Yishuv, before there's a state of Israel, accepts it. The Arabs do not. 48, they declare independence, but only in the area that was allotted by the partition. But not only did the Palestinians declare war, but so did every other Arab state, for the most part, declare war in 1948. Moving on, 1967, all the Arabs again attack Israel. Israel wins. They get a lot of territory.
The Arabs did not attack Israel in 1967. Israel started that. Israel started the 1967.
Oh, it did?
That's a false statement.
Okay. Have you ever heard of Gamal Abdel Nasser? Come on, man.
Well, I'm aware who Gamal Abdel Nasser is. I'm aware he was building up troops on the border. I'm also aware
like every other day he was saying, I'm going to destroy Israel?
I'm also aware he didn't start it. Israel started it. And
yeah, these two, they're just failing. He was looking for a gotcha. That's what he was looking for. That's what he was looking for. It's like, where can I chime in and get my gotcha? It's pathetic. It really is, because this debate is supposed to be productive. It's supposed to be. These type of debates won't necessarily change anything, but it's supposed to resonate with the audience. And the value of the conversation that is being had is trying to find some type of common solution. If the conversation is able to reach a certain type of compromise, then that will resonate to the people, resonate to the listeners. And once people hear this compromise, after hearing the intense debate of Israel versus Palestine, after hearing both points and listening to both points, then it's going to go like, oh, after I get all the information that was afforded to me and the compromise that was spelt out to me, this is something now I support. Now you have a slew of people who are listening and are in agreement of the compromise, the solution that is proposed. After that, you have more and more people starting to align with this, taken away from the pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel. Now they all hear the same type of conversation. They hear the same type of compromisal. Is compromisal a word? I don't think it is, but I'm going to make it a word. Compromisal solution. And by doing that, this kind of rhetoric gets kind of reverberated. It gets louder and louder and louder to the point where it may reach people's ears in Israel. So That is the value of these conversations. Not that these conversations will potentially start on something, but more and more solutions that are afforded to the audience, that are given to the audience, the people who want a solution, the more and more of those that exist, like actual solutions, because nobody's coming up with anything. They're just arguing and getting gotchas. The better, the closer we get to peace. That is the value of these debates. But he is trying to get gotcha, and she is trying to morally load everything. They're and not answering any questions. It's
U.S. intelligence's
sorry,
assessment
where
was
two Arab armies are massed on Israel's border, and their leaders are yelling and screaming
not
about
going
it,
to start the war. They passed this information on to
Let the man finish.
and they invaded anyway.
He didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt him. Why is this so fucking difficult? Sitting over here quiet as you guys speak. Let us talk.
Anyway,
Fucking hell.
after 1967, the first response from Israel was, all right, let's negotiate. And then they were greeted with what is known as the 3 no's. Now, fortunately, better leadership did come along. There was another war in 1973, we all know, and the Egyptians made peace, and then the Jordanians made peace, and other Arab states have largely gotten out of the maybe we can just destroy Israel business. The last stand here of the people who are still rejecting any possible partition are the Palestinians. And the Palestinians continue to start wars, which they hope will eliminate Israel, lose those wars, and then say, oh my, we're the victims. I want to go back to 1948. 1948, again, was not a war that the Jewish state started. It was a war that the Jewish state finished as part of its independence. Now, there were all kinds of population movements and transfers throughout the 1940s, as we all know. But the only group of people that has its own special UN organization to basically treat the great-grandchildren of original refugees as if they have this so-called right of return are the Palestinians. We don't hear anything about Kashmiris wanting to go to India or various ethnic Germans wanting to go back to their homes in Poland or any number of things. Millions of people in this period. The only people we care about is the Palestinians.
So what should they do? What should Palestinians do in your opinion?
Stop starting wars with Israel and losing.
But what about I think it's a fair point that they're not living in the best conditions.
No, they're not living in the best conditions. Right? And by the way, there have been gazillions of dollars of international development aid to Gaza. But guess what? It's stolen by their horrific and terrible leaders. And it's not just Hamas, who are these fanatic dirtbags, which we all know what they did on October 7th. It's also the Palestinian Authority. They're so incredibly corrupt. They pocket it for themselves. And the only way that they're able to constantly kind of hold on to power is by poisoning the minds of their population and making them think that they can destroy a thriving Jewish state that's there when Israel has in Oslo under Ehud Olmert. And I'm telling you, if there was a Palestinian leader that, okay, let's do it. Let's do the partition. I guarantee you, the Israelis would be fine with it, and we could get it done. But that's the problem. The problem is the Palestinians still want it all, and they just have to let it go. It's a dangerous position.
Then why was that not a boss?
Interesting. He actually answered the question. What do I think about his answer? It's an interesting point of view. But the crux falls, okay. My problem with his answer, and probably going to be my problem with their answer too, is okay, what about me? Right? So this is what I mean. We understand that there potentially may be cause of blame towards the actors individually. But when you are an actor yourself, when you're a participant in the conflict that is going on, you can't do anything about what they do. So at this point, you should ask yourself, what should I do? Now, sometimes there are enough things, there is enough like causal blame on the other side to say that I've done everything I can. It's all your fault. Now, maybe maybe that's what's going on now, because his point is that we are, well, he said international, so it might not be Israel. So maybe I won't even grant you that. But internationally, they are getting funded, and it is just getting used very corruptly. But still, I need to fall in line of what about Israel? What should Israel do, if anything? I don't think he answered what Israel can do, so he didn't answer the question completely. See, these are the nuances behind everything that's kind of taking place that need to be answered. But
the irony is that that's almost the opposite of what's true. It's been widely reported.
Is it almost the opposite of what's true?
Let's just say
wait a minute, Eli. There was a lot of screaming and hollering about interruptions. So I just want to know what the standards are before I continue.
Guys, let me do the moderating and you do the debating, okay? So say your piece.
Bibi Netanyahu was caught delivering suitcases of cash to Hamas. He's so invested in funding Hamas and Hamas being in power in Gaza. And the reason is Israel needs to be able to rely on the argument that the political power of the Palestinian.
Whoa. This is a crazy claim she just brought up. Hold on. Let me rewind this.
Bibi Netanyahu was caught delivering suitcases of cash to Hamas. He's so
that is a crazy claim, saying Netanyahu was caught sending money to Hamas. Let me look this up because that's a crazy claim. Netanyahu. U.S. reportedly considers the Blinklev arrives in Israel. No. Okay, here it is. Israeli officials are facing backlash after years of Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu quietly allowing Hamas to remain in power. But reporting in the New York Times has revealed that Netanyahu's government was more hands-on about helping Hamas. They helped a Qatari diplomat bringing... Okay, so here's the claim. They helped a Qatari diplomat bring suitcases of cash into Gaza, indirectly boosting the militant organization, according to the report. So, it's saying that they helped a Qatari diplomat bring cash into Gaza, which indirectly helped Hamas. Is that where she's banking her claim? Because that's a strong claim that she made, and what that says doesn't support what she said. Yeah, I don't know about that.
Invested in funding Hamas and Hamas being in power in Gaza. And the reason is Israel needs to be able to rely on the argument that the political power that Palestinians have is so radical, is so right-wing, is so hateful that there cannot be no negotiation. So he has worked to undermine the Palestinian Authority. He worked to undermine more moderate politicians that
I don't think she can prove any of these claims.
Nominated over the years, put forward over the years. And as early as this past week, as the International Criminal Court has looked into issuing warrants for Israelis who have committed war crimes.
Israelis and Hamas officials. Like, let's be... She's being a little dishonest. I'm not going to lie. And it's making me question a lot of the things she said earlier, because some of the things are not 100% true that she's saying. She's kind of like telling half-truths, and it's very shady.
What has been his response? His response has been to threaten not Hamas or anything going on in Gaza, but to threaten to do more war crimes in the West Bank if he or any other members of his administration are charged with any of these ICC warrants. There has been a repeated effort to punish the most moderate Palestinians, because otherwise he would be forced to make a case for why he doesn't think that people who are literally from what is now described as...
Punish the most moderate Palestinians. So are they... She's making very bold claims. Now, this bold claim is that they're specifically targeting the more moderate Palestinians because they don't want Palestine to change. Like, she's making very... It doesn't sound strong because of her tone is pretty even keeled, but these are very strong claims she is making that Netanyahu is doing.
Israel cannot return home. And the real reason why they cannot allow people to have the right to return is because there's a commitment to it being not just a pluralistic state like the one we live in, where we're very proud of having people from all over the world who found freedom from religious persecution. You can live however you want to live and practice whatever religion you want to practice, that they specifically want it to be a Jewish ethno-state. And if you were to allow the approximately 5 million or so Palestinians that live in the West Bank and in Gaza to be a part of contiguous Israel, they would lose a religious majority and lose the ability to have a pluralistic, progressive state. It would no longer be a Jewish ethno-state.
Okay. Can I respond to that? I follow you very closely. I don't remember Netanyahu's "we promised to do war crimes in the West Bank" speech, but okay.
What are you talking about?
You just said it, Brianna. You just said you promised to do more war crimes in the West Bank. I'm just basically quoting you back to you. Anyway, more importantly, I wanted to say Netanyahu did not deliver suitcases full of cash. He arranged for the Qataris to give development aid to Hamas because no one in Europe, for good reason, no one in America, for good reason, wanted to actually have the dirty up their hands by giving various kinds of money to a humanitarian group. But given the fact that...
Damn. Yo, he knows his stuff. Now, obviously, I had to look it up because I don't research this 24/7. I know what I know, and I learn more based on what I figure out. But the fact that he knew that right off the bat, he's fact checking her because, yeah, she just told a half truth. Like, did Netanyahu? Yeah. I'm gonna let him cook.
They were the sovereigns of Gaza. Someone needed to provide for basic infrastructure. That's what happened. That's what happened. That's what happened. And it wasn't Netanyahu's policy. This is a myth that lots of people believe that Netanyahu did this for some cynical reason. He did it because the entire rest of the civilized world, like the United States, was saying you have to figure out some way to get some development aid into Gaza, even though I understand that no other groups really want to, except for our reports, wants to deal with Hamas. It wasn't because, oh wow, we really like Hamas and launching rockets in our country every 6 months. Come on.
So
Guys,
I've given you, but I'll come back to you.
I have it in front of me.
I need to ask one question, and I'll come back to you.
Please, it's 2 sentences.
2 sentences. I'm going to hold
This is the Netanyahu quote. You can judge it.
Let me do the moderating. I'll take care of it. 2 sentences.
Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of the Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the
When did he say that?
That's Netanyahu in 2019 in a meeting with the coup leaders.
Okay.
2019.
Okay.
In the meeting with who? What meeting?
Eli, let me pause this for a second. Guys, let's park this. Michael, what should the Palestinians do?
Okay.
What
is the value of this statement, this quote? Oh, hold on. Let me. I'm trying to see what is being said. What is the purpose of the quote? Let me try to get all that context. Let me see if I can give this guy a dub.
Sure.
Guys, I've given you, but I'll come back to you in a second.
I have it in front of me.
I need to ask Michael a question, and I'll come back to you.
Please, it's 2 sentences.
2 sentences. I'm going to hold
This
this.
is the Netanyahu quote. You can judge it.
Let me do the moderating. I'll take care of it. 2 sentences.
Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of the Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part.
Has to hold on. Let me look up this quote. Netanyahu quote about Hamas in 2019. Let me look up this quote. I'm trying to find the quote right now because that's a crazy quote. When discussing the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, the following quotes occasionally came up. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. These were supposedly said by Netanyahu in the March of 2019. If true, then this would be pretty incriminating. Did he say I can't find the source of this quote. Okay, let me call him inherits. A direct line runs between the judicial overhaul and nothing you should blah 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 blah. I have to subscribe. Fuck, I'm not subscribing. Quoted saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza because maintaining the separation between the PA and the West Bank and Hamas in the Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Okay. We need to tell the truth and strategies to prevent. This is also why he had, I prefer Hamas to Abu Manzan. Helps me prevent a two-state solution is covertly an ally because neither it nor I want a final solution. Neither it might. These are crazy quotes. Like, where are these coming from? If these quotes are real, Netanyahu is finished. All right. Led by blah blah blah. The authority, which has now carried out the deadliest attack of Hamas, according to an op-ed article in the Times of Israel by blah blah blah. And as Hamas was upgraded, blah 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 blah. Hamas was also including discussions about so I don't know during a meeting that those who oppose the Palestine should support the transfer funds to Gaza. So I can't find anything concrete in terms of these quotes. Like, I can't find the original source at all, personally. So it's really hard for me to truly verify. Most everything I'm finding is like third-hand sources. But the general gist is that apparently in 2019, apparently this is the quote that he referred to, is that the idea is that Netanyahu wanted to support Hamas to prevent Abu Manzin and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza from kind of unifying and forming a kind of collaborative effort. That's the best way I could put it. Potentially trying to prevent a Palestinian state. I need to know more context. I need to find the primary source of that quote. The quote seems bad, but it depends on like what Hamas was at that time. Was Hamas a more kosher organization? Were they a organization you can support more in 2019 compared to now? It's possible that they were an organization that was just a better organization. Maybe Abu Manzin and what they were doing. Again, I don't know. I need more context. And what they were doing in the PA was the terrorist organization. And then Hamas in 2019 was deemed as the more negotiable organization. And that's why they wanted to kind of prevent them from collaborating to not create a bigger organization. There is context to make this seem not as bad as it sounds. His quote is pretty damning, but that was 5 years ago, and there's potentially so much context that is missing, and I can't find the primary source, so I can find out the context. The point of finding the primary source is to not only verify if it's a true quote, but to find out the context of the quote. Just naming random quotes is very sneaky. I need to know more. But it doesn't really matter now either. 5 years later, it doesn't really matter.
Part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West.
When did he say that?
That's Netanyahu in 2019 in a meeting with the Likud leaders.
Okay.
2019.
Okay.
In the meeting with who? What leader?
Eli, let me park this for a second. Guys, let's park this. Michael, what should the Palestinians do?
What do the Palestinians do? I didn't know where we are now. We're talking to the Palestinians, what they should do. I'm going to go back a little bit because I very mistakenly decided to wait for people to talk, that I would talk. Big mistake. But a couple things. You have to point out the boring things that everyone you hear like by rote all the time is that, there are 2 million Arabs that live in Israel. There are 0 Jews that live in Gaza, right? I think it's a relevant data point. And I suspect what Brianna's saying with right of return, and I think you said something that this place called Israel, so-called Israel or something. I suspect, and this is a weird conversation that we're having when people talk about Zionism these days. Incredible to me, but I thought this was a settled matter. Zionism is about this creation of the state of Israel, which was created. Were you a Zionist or were you an anti-Zionist? What I'm trying to figure out is if my opponents here believe that the state of Israel should exist at all, and if we should wipe a UN member nation off the map, because that is effectively what right of return is. The right of return is not take 7 million refugees, and it's not expands. These are people who have never been in the area, have resettled other places. And Benny Morris's book is far more nuanced than that is allowing. That there were people who were expelled, there were people that were forced out by their own side, etc. Benny Morris actually said this. Let me go to him that if you do have right of return, which probably 7 million people doesn't mean 7 million people that go to the West Bank and Gaza. Very specifically doesn't mean that. It goes to what Israel is now. In what Morris said, and I think it's an article tablet, he said, the response to this is if you think October 7th is bad, this is going to be a giant bloodletting. This is not as if 7 million Danes are coming in. These are people who have an ideological predisposition. Obviously Hamas now in West Bank is the most popular party, as Eli points out. Mahmoud Abbas and the PA have been as corrupt as you can be. You can see that with Suha Arafat's lifestyle in Paris. They've been stealing money for years. So that's their fault in some ways too. But the popularity of Hamas, and again, we have to be very simple about this, and cite this and cite that. But in its charter, which is to say, hey, guys, this is explicitly what we believe. Which was said by the other day. There was a quote from one of these Hamas spokesmen, and they said, no, we don't believe that we will never have a two-state solution with Israel. Israel must go. That is a non-negotiable position, and if anyone thinks, as the people who were chanting out in front of Columbia were chanting, and they weren't students, but important distinction apparently, but burn Tel Aviv to the ground. These are not nice people.
So what should the Palestinians do?
What the Palestinians do is, I have to be really boring again and repeat what Eli said, is don't launch wars that will result.
But how do they address the fact that they're living in conditions in which they don't want to live?
It's the same answer. It's the same answer. I mean, look,
No, that's a negative. Don't start a war is a negative answer. How do they get a better deal for them without starting?
Well, how about I say don't start future wars? That's one thing that you can do. But if you think about this, there's a Palestinian guy I interviewed, and he said, before the second Intifada, I could take my.
I wonder why he's asking what should the Palestinians do versus what should Israel do. What should Palestine do? Don't start wars. I mean, you're not really getting to what could they create a better system? Maybe. But if the notion is that it's corrupt from the top, then telling them to do anything is on empty ears, right? So at that point, it's more so should go into the hands of Israel. What should Israel do, right?
Donkey from the West Bank to the sea. And as a result of militancy and the absolute people shouting about intifadas, when you go back and see 1,000 Israelis were killed, 1,200 Israelis were killed during the second intifada. And what do you do now? I mean, look, it's a very, very difficult question. If I had that answer, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be in Tel Aviv cashing checks because I knew the answer to this. But the answer is, in the broadest possible way, is that you have a people that are corrupted by a corrupt ideology. What we will never talk about here, and I don't hear this talked about in any of the conversations about the conflict now, is Islamism, is a radical Islamic view of the world, which is dangerous. And it's dangerous if it's not going to. Anybody who has that sort of radical view of the world, and that is being inculcated in children. And so when we have these arguments with Ron DeSantis and the kids, the books kids are reading here, look at what is being taught to kids in Gaza. That is a very difficult question, Custom, and it's like a root and branch kind of thing. I didn't see a solution.
I'm going to move on. We've got about 15 minutes. And what I want to focus on is the bit of this conversation that's never had, and it's not part of the motion, but I think it's very important that we talk about it, which is how does this, at some point, please God, get resolved in one way or another? And the maximalist positions from both sides are quite obviously unattainable, certainly in my opinion. How do we find a way out of this rather than having a debate about what happened in 1967 and 1945? Because it doesn't appear to me that takes the conversation forward. So, Jake,
I actually disagree with that framing a little bit.
Okay, tell me why.
I do believe peace is possible, but
I swear to God, if you don't answer his question, I'm going to end this video. I'm getting tired of y'all not answering this question.
I think it actually requires a discussion of the past, because I think there does have to be a reckoning with the past in Israeli society in order for us to be able to move forward. And I want to talk about the United States as an analogy. So, in this country, we did terrible things to the Native Americans, and it was horrific. What we did in time was, after World War II, we gave billions of dollars in reparations to the Native Americans. We realized we were able to accept that we had done bad things, and we also gave Native Americans citizenship, okay, which they hadn't had for much of American history. That's the right way to deal with something like this. And
give that some shape. What does that solution look like?
It looks like a right of return. So you have to have at least a little bit of that. I mean, if you draw the borders in the right way for a two-state solution, it's possible that won't necessarily destroy the Jewish character.
Well, you're not. If you do a two-state solution, I'm thinking. Everything you said falls on deaf ears. For a two-state solution, that's not. I mean, America. I think you were onto something, but like you're saying. All right, I'm stuttering. You were onto something based on your own kind of point of view. It would have been better off if you went like a one-state solution. That way, everything you say makes sense. Everything you say doesn't make sense if you're doing a two-state solution. But I'm going to hear you out. Listen.
But why is that something? I don't understand why Michael is so interested in protecting that exactly. Again,
I think his argument is if you have 7 million Palestinians return, then you're in a position where that's going to cause way more conflict and war, not less. That's his argument, I think.
Yeah,
is that fair?
It's about right. Yeah.
I don't really think that's the case, and I think that's kind of ahistorical for the conflict. Listen, a lot has happened, so things are different now. But the conflict was really started by Zionists coming to Palestine, not to live just in a society with all these Arabs, but with the intention of forming a Jewish state on top of their country. And the Arabs didn't really like that very much.
So your solution is to not have a Jewish state?
Listen,
you're nodding.
well, listen, I think that is both ethical and workable. However, peace is what's most important to me, and I really want to stress
get that, right?
Yeah, so I understand that, to get there, you have to convince the Israelis on the ground to want that. There has been hate that has developed amongst Palestinians over a century.
You want to end bro, you sound like you said you want to end the Jewish state. Make up your mind. This is the problem with people who have opinions. They don't truly know what they want. Or they do know what they want. They just are so cowardly to say it. Because he's picking it apart magnificently as a moderator, because you went through all this, but it sounds like, yeah. So you're saying you don't want a Jewish state? That's what it sounds like, right?
Like, I certainly don't deny that. So there has to be changes in that society as well. It's a psychological shift. And that's why I say I do think we actually have to talk about the past and reckon with what happened with the past, so that people on both sides can be able to say wrong things happened here and we need to move on and change. And I actually do think that was sort of happening a little bit in Oslo. You hear so much about how the tone shifted in that decade, but it wasn't enough, and it wasn't going to go far enough. And ultimately, if there's some solution. Listen, I don't know. This is literally the most complicated geopolitical conflict in the world. It's famous for that. And so, any solution
you can't bitch about it and say it's the most
complicated. Get them to stop fighting and get them to live in peace. I'm happy with that.
I hear you. That's why I'm asking the question. And by the way, I'm not expecting us to solve it here, although that'd be nice. But I do think we have an obligation to think about how this gets solved. So, Brianna, what would your solution look like?
I think the idea that there can't be a world where Jews and Muslims, Arabs and non-Arabs live together is belied by the reality of history. Prior to the founding of Israel, Arab Jews did live peacefully alongside Muslims in what is now described as Israel. And there was this quip about how there are no Jews living in the West, in Gaza. Why would there be? You had an establishment of a Jewish state that is the #1 welfare beneficiary of the United States of America, receiving more American aid than any other country in the world, despite obviously being more affluent than most of the countries in the world. I think there's a relationship there. Currently, there is a significant Christian population in Gaza. One of the oldest Christian churches in the world has been bombed by Israel in the course of all of this. Former Congressmember Justin Amash has lost family members that have been killed by Israel in the context of this, and even that wasn't enough to shake American foreign policy.
How do you get to a solution?
So I think that we have to not talk about Arabs as though they're somehow constitutionally different than Danes. I don't know why we would essentialize populations in that way.
She always tries to morally load everything without answering anything.
We have to be open to the idea.
Danes don't do October 7th?
Wait a minute. Muslims didn't do October 7th.
Not since the Vikings.
Gazans didn't do October 7th. And if you're adopting the worldview, but everyone in Gaza, 2.3 million people, are responsible, then you are very much in line with Netanyahu's right-wing government, who thinks that and therefore thinks it's appropriate to violate international law by doing collective punishment on the population, literally starving them to death, having them on the brink of famine, killing 13,000 kids. There was a very passionate description of the graphic reality of October 7th at the beginning of this talk. And I just want to take a moment to say that it's also true that we've seen video after video of Palestinian father picking up the pieces of his.
She's not answering the question. She is so frustrating. Oh my goodness. This is a terrible performance by her. She just wants to morally load everything without answering anything.
Children, collecting them in a plastic bag. I totally agree. The question in Israel, protesters are protesting Netanyahu because of the news widely reported again this week that he the American soldier that just had the proof of life without an arm, because Netanyahu has made the decision to want to persecute this.
20 more seconds. The solution, please, go.
The solution is there has to be, I think the world where they had a two-state solution. America just said again, it's not demonstrated again, that's not a part of our policy, as evidenced by the fact that we vetoed the recognition of Palestine as a state, which is a path toward getting a two-state solution just last week. So there has to be a one-state solution, which means that there cannot, when Hamas is talking about eliminating Israel, it's talking about not killing all of the Jews, it's about eliminating the idea. It's about,
leave that.
She just said when Hamas, let me look this up. This is why fact checking everything. What is Hamas doctrine on Jews? What Hamas charter actually says about Jews? This is good for my reference too, because I'm fine. Hey man, I'm fine with being wrong. I'm trying to find the more updated version. I'm not reading everything. I guarantee this. The doctrine is too long. The truth of Hamas is in its charter. For Hamas, blah blah blah. The idea, it blames Jews for both wars as well as the French and Russian Revolution, claims Jews control the global media, and explicitly demands their deaths. Oh, well, I mean, if that's what it says, I don't know what she's talking about.
Let me just finish, sir. Can I finish this? It's about eliminating the idea of a Jewish state. Ending a Jewish state, ending an ethno-national state, having a state more like what we have in the United States of America.
If I can just respond to that one thing quickly.
Michael, we're actually running out of time.
Yeah, very, very quick. The Danes point, the pluralism of the Danes. It's not Gaza. I saw a news story the other day, the AFP, that about the 5 Jews left in Baghdad, you see the most vibrant Jewish population in the Middle East, and that was the other Nakba, 700,000 Jews that were run out of. I visited a totally destroyed shell of a synagogue in Libya, and my guide said to me, that used to be something back in the 1930s, we had thriving. That is the problem in the neighborhood, is that, it's Russia, it's everywhere, it's been pushed out, and that is not as if it is just a problem that is localized.
Okay, so a couple of minutes on what the solution is. How does this get solved? I know you said earlier that it's tough and you'd be making lots more money than you are.
You think that I'm going to come up with an actual creative solution?
Well, I would like to hear from all of you a step towards the solution. I think that's a reasonable ask.
A step towards the solution is the destruction of Hamas and the return of the hostages.
How do you do that?
That's a start.
How do you destroy Hamas?
It's happening now. It's happening now.
It's not.
I mean, we had a conversation. If we believe Hamas's own numbers that 6,000 of their fighters have been killed,
so
that's a start.
You're comfortable.
No, you've had your time. Go for it.
Well, I just want to say something. In a rare point of agreement with Brianna, that I agree that we should think about a world where Arabs and Muslims and Jews can live together.
Jesus, this debate was so unproductive. Shout out Denzel Curry.
In a peaceful society, but fortunately that place exists. It's called Israel. Now, my solution is very similar to Michael's. There are times in history when a particular group suffers such a massive military defeat that it creates ripples of discrediting of this kind of approach. And there needs to be a kind of reckoning for Palestinians to give up on their 100-year delusion that their freedom and that their sovereignty depends on the elimination of Israel. And I know that you are coming, Brianna, from a very good place where you say, well, everybody should live in peace in one state from the river to the sea. But in fact, what you're doing is you're feeding the delusion that's only going to get more Palestinians killed. What friends of Palestinians should say is very simply, this is never going to happen. You're not going to eliminate Israel, except half a loaf. And Israel changes on a dime. They have elections, it seems, every 3 months. So the point is, and by the way, the last government before this one had for the first time an Arab party in the ruling coalition. There are Arab Supreme Court justices. So if there was a viable Palestinian leader that said, all right, let's do it, let's negotiate a deal, I am sure the Israelis would say, great, because they just want to get on with their lives like, so many other people in the world.
How likely is that viable Palestinian leader to emerge?
Well, it can only emerge after everybody who believes that Hamas has, all of this momentum, sadly, bolstered by these moronic college students and professors.
Hamas is literally bolstered by Benjamin Netanyahu.
What? Say it again?
You're blaming college students for bolstering Hamas when we know that Benjamin Netanyahu, as quoted to you directly just now, is the one that's bolstering them.
You factually
solution.
Well, I heard a solution. That's all we got for today. Interesting, not very productive, but there is 2 points that I find very interesting in this debate that don't. Well, 1 point, and that is Netanyahu. Who is he really? That is the biggest question, right? What is he trying to achieve? What is Netanyahu in particular trying to achieve? Because I did find something in referencing her quote. I think the fact that everything sounds like she thinks that the entire everything Netanyahu does is in correlation to make this war happen is a bit flawed. I need to know more context behind the quote. I need to know who Hamas was in 2019 versus 2024. There's a lot of information that is left out, but that's all we got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed, of course. Like and subscribe. You have a good one. Take care and peace.